Okay, Marc Kenigsberg, how are you?
Well, thanks yourself, Georges. Thanks for having me.
I'm very good, yeah. I wanted to talk to you about, I guess, Coin Janitor and Block Smarter and whatever else you wanted to talk about.
Great. So I guess a little bit about me and talk about the projects.
Mm-hmm.
I've been involved in online marketing for most of my career.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2013, I read an article about Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was really cool, but I didn't understand it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And from then I just started trying to learn about it and see how it worked. And I went further and further down the rabbit hole. And today I'm a huge proponent of Bitcoin and like its ability for positive, transformative good.
Mm-hmm.
And about 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago, I started Coin Janitor.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is actually very simple.
Mm-hmm.
There are way too many shit coins.
Yeah.
And people, it's amazing that anyone can create a coin,
Mm-hmm.
but there should be some sort of mechanism, A, to only create coins that are useful.
Mm-hmm.
And B, when coins aren't useful anymore, there should be some sort of mechanism to clean them up,
Mm-hmm.
salvage anything that can be and recycle it back into the community. And that's really the idea behind Coin Janitor. Like when a company fails, the shop closes, someone else replaces it. And I think we don't yet understand that digital space is still space. And there is a cost to pay for using it. We kind of ignore it. And it's like when we started sending satellites into space, we just kept sending them up because there was so much space.
Mm-hmm.
Until one day someone went up and had a look and it looked like a junkyard and we had to clean it up. And I think the same thing is going to happen in crypto.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So just to step back a little bit, I mean, I totally agree with you about Bitcoin, but a lot of people in a lot of other podcasts, especially investors, when they talk about cryptocurrency and distributed systems, for some odd reason still in 2019, they don't immediately see the value of Bitcoin. So can you tell me why do you think this technology is so interesting, just for starters?
Okay. So just to be clear on the question, we're talking about, Bitcoin or crypto in general or Bitcoin versus other cryptocurrencies?
Just crypto in general. Yeah. What is the immediate value add that you perceive?
So, I mean, really it's censorship resistance.
Mm-hmm.
I think from a technical perspective, the killer app of crypto is censorship resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of from a social or cultural perspective, it's the ability to mobilize people's imagination into action.
Mm-hmm.
It showed us what could be possible theoretically. It started a discussion about how change could happen, about new types of technology that could be built.
Mm-hmm.
And that inspired and is inspiring a generation of people to try and build tomorrow's technology.
Right.
So I think that that's something that's often ignored, like just how it ignited the imagination of so many people,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a very transformative technology, especially, like you said, because of the censorship resistant aspect of it. So with Coin Janitor, I mean, I'm not sure I'm 100%. We might mostly agree that certainly there are a lot of altcoins that don't add value, right?
Sure.
On the other hand, I mean, there are some interesting innovations that happen in the altcoin space. Like, for example, Zcash, right? With zero knowledge proofs. I mean,
sure.
That's an interesting engineering achievement there, right? That people would be able to complete transactions over a public distributed ledger without anyone other than the transactor and the transactee knowing who's involved, right? That's interesting. But on the other hand, I also see that Bitcoin plus the Lightning Network solves that problem equally well. And that there's not necessarily a lot of other altcoins that have actually currently really none of them are particularly necessary. I'm glad that they exist, and I'm glad that there's developers working on different problems and trying to innovate. And we certainly don't want to outlaw that or make that difficult. But yeah, I agree that there's not a lot of altcoins right now that add a tremendous amount of value to the ecosystem.
So to be clear, I'm not saying that no altcoin is good.
Right.
I'm not saying that there isn't space for any other coins.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that the space is filled with a lot that clearly don't serve purpose.
Yeah, I agree.
In terms of Bitcoin, I mean, now, like we've seen with Grin and, Beam had some issues, but Mimblewimble implementations are starting.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's a great example of confidential transactions. But
mm-hmm.
one of the challenges with Coin Janitor was we wanted to position ourselves not as any sort of authority that determines whether a coin should exist or not.
Mm-hmm.
There is a necessary use case for other altcoins, right? Mm-hmm. I do believe in it. I believe in Bitcoin, but I believe that there is space for others to exist. And even in the simplest form, just as the ability to create new technologies or to strengthen Bitcoin by comparison, there's many reasons altcoin should exist.
Mm-hmm.
Once the community or that coin itself has decided it no longer has a future, it tried something and it failed,
mm-hmm.
that's when Coin Janitor steps in. Everything we do is in conjunction with the project owners, the people who started the coins,
mm-hmm.
and with consensus of the community.
Right.
So we don't want to be people who say, okay, this is a good coin or a bad coin or anything like that. Mm-hmm. We just want to say, okay, if you've got to a stage where you no longer want to continue the coin, mm-hmm. let us help you to salvage values and give something back to the user.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So how does that work? How do you salvage value from a dead project?
It's a great question. And I mean, how all of this started was like so many good ideas. We were drunk at a bar, mm-hmm. and we got into an argument about the kind of theory of the economics in crypto and how many coins there are and this exact question. And basically the next day, I wanted to prove my point. So I started researching it.
Mm-hmm.
And no one's ever done it before. So a lot of what we're doing, we're learning as we go. But the premise is based on a couple of key things. One is that there's a difference between price, value, and utility.
Mm-hmm.
Very often in crypto, we confuse them.
Mm-hmm.
We think price means value, but it doesn't. Someone can have value from something that is subjective. Price is an objective measurement of the cost. They're two very different issues. So the obvious example, and just for anyone watching, is if you're carrying a machete in the jungle, it's extremely valuable. If you're carrying it in the streets of New York, less valuable. It still costs the same.
Right.
The second premise is, what is there that has any inherent value in a failed project?
Mm-hmm.
And there's really three parts. The one is technical, and that speaks to code base. Now, the majority of projects we are speaking to and dealing with at the moment have no technical value because they're just early clones of Bitcoin. But some of these projects do. They create an interesting shell extension. Maybe they have a great user interface. Maybe they have some elegant way of implementing a class library. Some of this code is useful in other projects, but it will never be found.
Mm-hmm.
The second is the marketing. Each of these projects has a Twitter account, a Reddit thread. They have a Bitcoin talk thread. They sometimes have email lists. They have reach. They have a way of speaking to people.
Right.
And the third is community. Ultimately, the only determinant of long-term success, in my opinion, in crypto is network effect. Mm-hmm. And network effect is simply a function of community. Whether users, nodes, whatever it is, but ultimately that's what gives Bitcoin its strength.
Okay.
So if you have these fragmented communities, they're weak. They can't really access their value because they're in a failed project. But now imagine, so those three things, being code, being marketing, and being community. What we do is we take all the code from the project. We look if there's anything interesting. If there is, we file it in an open source library, which now makes it accessible and discoverable.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the marketing, one Twitter account or one website on its own isn't worth a lot. But 500 of them 1,000 forum threads, which we can now speak to people who subscribe to them, that starts to exponentially increase our marketing reach. And unlike many other projects which are trying to acquire users one by one, because we actually pay users to give us their coins. So you have a coin that's worth 0 and we're offering to give you something for it. Right. We're onboarding entire communities at a time. And a lot of these are the earliest adopters in crypto. So 300 people from Project X, 500 people from Project Y, 1,000 people from Coinverse. And all of a sudden, the rate of growth of our community starts becoming exponential. So the theory is that as we grow and have more reach, and as we go through more types of amalgamations, we will become better at extracting value and be able to reach more people, which allows us to reach more projects. And it's the purest form of network effect. Okay.
So when, you know, as you build this audience, essentially, that you're building of people that were interested in coins that are no longer viable for whatever reason, what types of, you know, projects or activities are you communicating to them? Like, what exactly are you reaching out to them for?
Okay, great. So right now, we're really in an early stage where we're just trying to create the precedent. To do this a few times to show that it can be done, that we are good actors, etc., etc.
Okay.
And one of the biggest challenges we have at the moment is we're a zero revenue business. We did crowdfunding to support us as a project, not to try and make money. Right. We never promised anyone would make money. In fact, in all the talks I gave, I encouraged people who want to make money not to give us anything.
Right.
What we're trying to do right now is just build up a system, build up a mechanism for doing this on an ongoing basis. And that means that we don't generate revenue. We aren't releasing any of the cool tech we've built. We have a way to do a lot of automatic swaps, things like that, and to kind of automate a lot of the burn process. But right now, every swap is done manually, one user to one user, because we want this message to be pure. We have two challenges. We have to find a technical way to do this and operationally, but we also have to educate the market. It will be obvious in a year or two there's a need for this. But right now, it's not obvious yet. So I don't want to confuse the message. It makes our job harder, but I think it's a good way to do it. Like, we only burn and take over projects that fail. We make no money. We do nothing else. That's all. But what is starting to happen is already internally, and we're going to be releasing a forum on our website soon. People are starting to speak to each other. Developer from this project, or speak to one of our developers. Oh, look, I had this idea. Originally, I was trying to do this. And ideas are starting to emerge. And already guys have started working on a couple of projects together. Like, how can we reuse something cool I built with the new technology today? Or wait, if I took your idea from X and I put it with this, we might have something. So we're a little bit in hibernation mode from a public perspective at the moment. We haven't launched our new website. Publicly, we're not displaying any of our data, only internally and to some of our users. But within the next couple of weeks, we're going to put up some of our lists. Like, we've been categorizing coins for more than a year. We have the largest list of cryptocurrency, like larger than any other website. We have lists of every inactive project that we could find on the internet. And then we'll start releasing tech. And we'll start doing other things. And the idea is that our community members will benefit first and foremost from anything that we build. It's always meant to be like a kind of organization rather than a company, if that makes sense.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, we know how expensive it is and how difficult it is to develop viable software, right? So any effort that gets software that's already been developed to be reused is obviously very valuable, and any effort that can also bring people that are willing to work essentially for free, people that could easily be making well over $100,000 that are working for free to continue collaboration across different projects and to reuse and maybe even have new ideas emerge is a wonderful idea. When you talk about storing the existing code on open source repositories. Are you guys planning to have your own repository, or are you guys maybe using existing repos like GitHub, or how exactly are you storing these repositories?
That's a great question. So right now, the coins we're working with, none of them have anything interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually something in the end that we'll let the community decide.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you've got some really good established like repositories already.
Mm-hmm.
So we can just open up some sort of branch there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a need to recreate something. You want to take advantage of critical mass, make it easily accessible for people.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I mean, nothing really interesting from a code perspective. But if you shoot forward, because we're starting with the oldest coins,
Mm-hmm.
you shoot forward and imagine that every time we find a line of code that's interesting, it gets categorized
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of indexed. Like my dream, if you will, is that a couple of years from now, we have a library of every piece of code no longer in use that was ever written in crypto that might be useful to someone. And that's super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, are there any potential applications of some code or some people that you're speaking with or some projects that might be winding down that you currently are excited about? Are there any features that you'd like to recycle, or is there anything that you want to kind of advance?
Yeah, they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really say anything until we've closed and agreed. And that's kind of the strange thing about the project is we do nothing, then we announce something. We do nothing, we announce something. But there's really three things that come to mind. The one is we're working with, it's a swap technology
Mm-hmm.
that will allow us to very efficiently, without having to contact every user,
Mm-hmm.
swap a lot of tokens very, very fast across hundreds of different coins. Right now, we have operational capability to do about 10,000 manual swaps a month.
Okay.
Which sounds like a lot, but it's not if you consider the amount of coins. So we're doing 3 at a time and then 1 incrementally.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is we are working with someone who has a project that's newer,
Mm-hmm.
and they do have an interesting piece of software they didn't finish.
Mm-hmm.
And we have someone in our community plus one of our developers that is very interested in actually finishing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of simple, but it's kind of elegant, and it would be a great add-on to a lot of existing things. And it would help a lot of other users. It's a user enhancement. Like a lot of sophisticated users in Bitcoin would be doing this kind of thing on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But the applications in Bitcoin and the wallets generally don't allow it. So it's very, very cool if we could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is a partnership. We have a couple of partnerships which we've announced. Like we're working with CoinFirm and SecureVote and deadcoins.com and a couple other people are going to be announcing soon.
Mm-hmm.
But we have another potential partnership which is very, very deep and would give us access to a lot of really, really cool stuff. So I know that doesn't really answer the question, but I'm very excited. And one of the hardest things for me on this project is I like talking and I have to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't get to talk about all the things we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hoping that with the next couple of months, because it has been very, very difficult, more difficult than I thought, to close a lot of these buyouts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm hoping that we'll be able to start showing what we're doing, and I think people will really start to get it.
Right. One question that I have is, why? I mean, are you only necessarily focusing on promoting interesting features of dead coins, or do you think that you would ever be in a position to promote features of existing altcoins that could be perhaps implemented or reused with a more viable coin, like let's say, original Bitcoin, right? Like, do you think that that there's stuff in the altcoin space that doesn't necessarily need to be winded down, but innovations that could benefit the mainline Bitcoin community?
100%. It's a great question. I think that would be the ideal. if we get to a stage like that, it would be a function of us having a large enough or an interested enough community. So we could potentially leverage the community to do something, or take advantage of skills we have, or use our reach. So I think that we kind of this microcosm for the larger market anyway. We're taking a lot of the people who got interested in the beginning. We're saying like, look, you love this because it was free and it was open source and enabled change. Help us to, recreate that space and clean up some of the mess. And if we're successful, then we'll kind of be some sort of smaller version of the general community, but we'll have a lot of the earliest people in it. And I think that allows us to not necessarily promote a feature, but to work with existing projects that aren't winding down to say, okay, with what you have plus what we have from a community perspective, all of a sudden this feature enables rollout in a much more effective way, or we can get you in front of the people that need, that kind of thing. I'm a bit of a mad scientist at the best of times, and I kind of have all these visions of what this could be. And it was really, I think I bit off more than I can chew, and it took me a while to get my head around it. Like, I've been doing this for a year and a half. Like, I don't have a job. I mean, this is what I do, and on a zero revenue project, so I want to get to a world where we can do all these cool things, because that's ultimately why we did it. But we have to go through these market education processes as well.
Do you think that there is a way, not necessarily to monetize it, but I mean, having revenue models that allow you to sustain and grow the business, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to become the next Fortune 500, but if it has value, I mean, and you have centralized infrastructure costs to maintain, and you would like to also have staff, I mean, do you envision a way to add some kind of revenue models to this organization?
Yeah, great question. So right now we're less than 10 people actively working. And all of the original development plus going to market for the crowdfunding, everything was funded by us out of pocket. So we do have some really, really great routes to monetization. And I'm happy to talk about some of them, but I don't believe the time is right yet to do them. I'm trying to maintain some purity of message, and we will be starting with some simple things like advertising and stuff like that, probably sooner than later. But one of the most obvious routes to monetization is data. We've been collecting data for a year and a half. And what Coin Janitor is, from a technical perspective, is it's an incredibly efficient data aggregation platform. We aggregate data, we crawl like the web. We have so much raw data from forum threads, from one website that mentioned a coin 6 years ago. We've literally manually been trying to find sources. And every time we find a source of any sort of metric, we just add it into the data. And the system just continually aggregates and crawls. And two of the partnerships we're going to be announcing soon are quite large websites that we've included as sources. And we actually have a deal in a month where we're going to start pushing out data to some other websites. So there's a lot of people who've approached us. They want the data. Because you can model on this. You have, 6, 7, 8 years in some cases of historic data, development commits, social sentiment, all this kind of stuff. You can learn a lot about these coins. So that's very, very simple, like enterprise APIs on obvious route to monetization. Also tools, like we're working on a couple of tools. They will be free for Janitor holders. Anyone who's part of our community will have access to them, but some of them serve really well, subscription-based tools, kind of SaaS services, So yeah, the aim is to make Coin Janitor sustainable from a cash perspective.
Right.
That's the aim.
Okay. I guess another question that I have is generally, how do you message your service to altcoin communities? Like, how do you reach out to these people, or do you reach out to them, or do you wait for them to reach out to you? Like, Like, and what is it exactly that you propose to these teams? How do those interactions work? Like, do you reach out to people and say, hey, we think your project it appears to be winding down, or maybe it should wind down, or how exactly do you, because the reason I bring this up is, sometimes some people just believe in a project so firmly that they don't necessarily want to give it up, and they kind of go down with the ship, and they stick with it for much longer than they should, when maybe there's a better value add for them to jump on to another project or do something else. But that messaging, the approach, how do you approach those people, or do you approach anyone at all? How does that work?
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of chicken and egg.
Mm-hmm.
Like where we are at the moment, we are speaking to a lot of different coins.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them are waiting until we've absorbed a certain number of coins before they're willing to do it.
Right.
So it's kind of strange. In the beginning, we mostly relied on people coming to us, and we did get quite a lot of interest. But now we actively reach out to people. So we've been doing that for a couple of months. And what we do is we try and identify the project owners. We message them, we send private messages on Twitter, on the forums, we'll contact people through, like, if I know someone that knows someone, that kind of stuff. So at the moment, myself and one of the other founders, we probably spend about a third of our week, like, just speaking to project owners that we've connected with. But the space is also very paranoid. So, setting up these conference calls is quite a challenge. And then we just continually message more and more and more. We could just easily go and, like, post on public, we saw X coin, we think it's dead, we want to buy. But I don't think that's good acting. I don't think it's fair to be kind of passing these judgments on other people's projects, Right. So we are trying wherever possible to get to a human being. We're trying to do it, off, under the radar, so that no one knows we're identifying projects. And then the theory is, once we've reached a certain number of buyouts, then the kind of floodgates will open and more people will come to us, Right. In terms of the discussion and how that happens, so there are really a few stages to it. The first is explaining the idea conceptually, which what I found is 90% of people, they just get it. It makes total sense to them. The question is if they think it fits their project, And then about half the people, they do think it does, and then it becomes technical. Like, there's a lot of technical stuff involved in how to actually absorb an entire blockchain, burn it. How do you deal with consensus? We don't own all the coins. There are some real technical challenges which we've solved. But most of my discussion with developers very quickly go technical, and we'll spend 3-4 hours going through kind of our technical, like, whatever. All the stuff we have, we show them a lot more, And then they get to a point where they understand that we actually can pull it off. And then it becomes commercial. Either whether they want to do this or they just rather kind of fade into the background, or the actual commercial offer. And what I'm finding is that, I guess it's a human nature thing. A lot of people get to the point where they're like, it's a great idea, totally makes sense technically. I think you should do this, but not with mine.
Right.
I don't want to be one of the first people to admit that my project failed. It's exactly what you're saying. Like, I had one which was really interesting. Guy came to me, totally got the idea, wanted to do it, told me his project stopped. They haven't done anything on it in like 3 years. Totally perfect candidate. So I said to him, great. So we made an offer, and he said no, he wants more. And I was saying to him, like, dude, with all respect, you have 2 offers on the table, which is mine or nothing, And he said he'll wait for a better offer, So it kind of this irrational side of it. And I'm also very kind of clinical, logical. So it makes no sense to me. But I get it from some people's perspective. We right now our token price is very low. If we buy out a few and continue to grow, it will be worth something. But the way I see it is, you have a project that's proven it's at the end of its lifespan versus one that's just beginning. And you add to that the kind of feel-good factor of being able to turn to your community and say, look, I tried, it didn't work. Here's a way you could potentially get something out of it and join a community again, But not everyone wants to do that. And from an operational perspective, the buyout happens in two stages. The first is the project owner is bought out, which means because we pay everything in our tokens, we don't pay in cash. So we give them an amount. We have a basic model for determining the price of a project that isn't traded. And then we give them X number of tokens. I guess there's 1,000 tokens, that's for your project. In return for that, we get access to, GitHub or whatever repositories they're running. We get access to their, forum accounts and that. And then we remove anyone else. So we are the only people who can access that technically. Then the second stage is we pay users. So any user who has that coin, we will trade for them 1-for-1 or whatever the rate that we've set. So the two parts of the buyout. There's a whole technical chunk in between about how we actually do that and how we deal with consensus. One of the interesting challenges we've had is not all coins, are fully proof of work, which is where we try to start. Or you have different stages of mining. You have coins which are mostly mined. You have coins which have partial pre-mines. You have coins which, have rewards, don't have rewards. So we developed a whole, kind of flow chart of, if it does this, we go this way. If it does this, we go this. And we have like 6 or 7 basic technical steps that we implement, but each of them, like it's a pretty big workload. I mean, I don't think people realize how much work it is in trying to actually do this. It's a lot of work,
No, I can imagine. One thing that you mentioned is that you encounter a lot of paranoia when you're approaching certain people. What do you think that's about?
I think primarily it's the space. One of the earliest appeals of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency was the anonymity, which we understand is really pseudo-anonymity. But you have this entire culture or market built on the idea that I can be anyone I want. Look at Bitcoin and 4chan, look at all of the stuff. And now you go to someone and say, okay, in order, to do something cool that you forgot about and you don't even want to deal with, I need your identity. Most people's reactions are like, look, I can just not tell you who I am and carry on doing nothing. I don't see why I should, reveal. And then the second thing is, who are we? There's so many, whether it's phishing scams or, the wrench attack, right? It's still the most dangerous attack in Bitcoin. So I think people are just not very trusting in the space, and with good reason, That's why I always contact people with my name. All my accounts are my name. I try and say, look, this is my details, and we always try and find someone who knows the developer personally,
Right, obviously. Yeah, it's interesting in the Bitcoin community that the pseudo anonymity, because I was watching this talk on the A16Z podcast with one of the lead agents on the Silk Road case, and she was talking about how actually the transparency of the Bitcoin blockchain is what allowed them to find the agents that were embezzling funds and doing criminal activities, right? Had it not been for the immutable, uncensorable record of complete record of transactions on the blockchain, some of these agents that were actually working for the FBI would not have been caught doing what they were doing. So I thought it's an interesting irony that although Bitcoin it's not anonymous, it's like you say, pseudo anonymous, in that your wallet address is not linked to your passport number or anything like that. It's still, you can still trace, you can still follow transactions through the entire blockchain. So it's not really, the primary value add of Bitcoin right now, as it stands, is actually its transparency more than anything else, right? That's what's interesting about it. That's a bit of a misconception, right? It's an immutable, uncensorable, completely transparent record of transactions, right? So it's not necessarily even designed for anonymity. With things like routed transactions over the Lightning Network, you can also have privacy-centric applications. But yeah, it's an interesting irony there that this technology is actually more transparent than anything else, right? That people don't necessarily get that. Yeah.
I think you're right. And I think the misconception is most amongst people that don't use Bitcoin. It's kind of the classic, Bitcoin is used for drugs and murder, and it's totally anonymous,
Right.
And like the currency most used for drugs and murder is the US dollar,
Right. Yeah.
And cash pretty much is untraceable. The transparency of it stands to benefit a lot of people, but it stands to benefit people in very different ways. And the average person who doesn't want to give up his identity, or to risk, identity theft, or to hand over control of, his life to some sort of state or organization, can use the transparency in a certain way. But one of the parties that stands to benefit the most from the immutability and transparency of it is the government. And this is what a lot of people outside Bitcoin don't understand. It's like going to a shop, taking a $20 bill out of a cash register and saying to the money, tell me where you came from. That's what Bitcoin does. It says, well, on Thursday, Bob gave me to Jane, and Jane before used me to buy drugs. And originally I came from Puerto Rico. I was carried across the border in a suitcase. Like, there is a complete record of everything. And it's not strictly true, but every piece of every coin, which a lot of people don't understand as well about Bitcoin, it's not like 100 times divisible. You have a dollar, which has 100 cents in it. Every Bitcoin has 100 million pieces in it. Every one of those little pieces is, again, oversimplifying, but essentially holographic, right? It can tell where every other piece of every other coin's ever been. So it's even more than, your money being able to tell where it's been. It's like the government has in its pocket $1 and it can tell where George's money was, It's, people completely misunderstand the technology, completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I see that the value add is definitely for unbanked people and the censorship resistant aspect of people in countries like Venezuela or even China. I mean, I remember at some point one of the biggest use cases for Bitcoin was actually getting money out of mainland China because it's incredibly difficult. Now there's obviously, that's kind of a double-sided sword there, that's not necessarily the most moral thing to do, because a lot of the people getting money out of China are corrupt government officials. But that's another story. Yeah.
Point taken.
Yeah.
I don't want to in any way give the impression that I'm advocating to use this technology to do anything that's illegal.
Right.
Just because something is technically possible doesn't mean it should be done. I think we still live in places, we need to respect those laws and, be good actors within societies we exist in. But I think what's really, really powerful about the transparency and censorship resistance, which most people don't understand, is the unbanked. Exactly what you're talking about. Not only does it have the power as a financial instrument or, a payment method to give access to basic services to these people. Like, I'm from South Africa. I don't think the average person in the first world understands how bad the unbanked problem is, because people get screwed twice by not having a bank account. But the second thing is the idea that the public or community or some sort of village or any sort of organized group of people can decide to enact a change and use money that's collected, have voting, without the need for a central system that's monitored and maintained by an existing third party somewhere else. It gives incredible power to people because you don't have to convince someone else your idea is good. This technology and the idea of a public ledger gives people the ability to do something because they want to for the good without having to convince the person who previously held the keys to the kingdom. And that, over the next few years, is where we will really start to see change from Bitcoin. People understand it. Smart contracts are the perfect example of that. Not everything has to be on a global scale. Like Vinay from Ethereum, he has great ideas for how we can use, these networks to power space exploration and large scale building and infrastructure development. And it's super cool. But sometimes we're thinking so far ahead, we forget that 100 people in a rural area in the middle of nowhere could use this technology to access global services in a way that doesn't require 3 months waiting for someone to come install an electricity line. Unbanked people, they get screwed twice by not having a bank account. And a lot of people don't understand this. One of the privileges of being first world is that we get to pay after the fact. Unbanked people have to pay before the fact. It's kind of the ultimate irony of the financial system. The people who need the money the most don't have access to it. So if you want electricity and you don't have a bank account, or you live in rural infrastructure, you have to pay before you use the electricity in order to get some sort of quota of electricity. Now, us in the first world, we use electricity freely and we pay for it after the fact. It's a radically different paradigm. The second thing is, because you're paying up front, you pay at a premium. So where we pay maybe 10 cents a kilowatt, these guys are being charged 50 cents a kilowatt. Now, for people that live on $1 or $2 a day, this becomes a material percentage of their income. So they're getting screwed both in the cost and also in the fact that they actually have to make the choice between basic services or food, where we get to worry about it after the fact.
And, you know, why is it so difficult, in your opinion? I mean, I think the reasons are obvious, but maybe not to everyone who might be watching this. Why is it so difficult to bring basic banking services to people in developing countries?
So, I mean, there are a lot of different reasons depending on which country it is, right? And I mean, the classic examples, I guess, are, you know, like Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America. In a lot of places, unfortunately, you have corruption, and that's tainted financial systems. So that's obvious. We'll put that aside. Risk. A lot of people don't understand that banks are businesses, and people who don't have regular income that can be depended on are too high risk. The other thing is just basic logistics and proximity. Like if you look at people that live in outlying rural areas, like they don't necessarily have access to internet, to things like this. They may be 100 kilometers away from a bank branch. You know, a lot of the time proximity just determines like access. I mean, there's some other reasons as well, you know, and I want to make the point for a second that I don't hate all banks. I don't think banks are inherently bad. I think the financial system allowed us to develop after the Industrial Revolution. It allowed us to develop and progress as a society. You know, so I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of people in this space and other space make this mistake. Okay, everything's binary. Okay, they're evil or they're good. No, it was the best system we had. It worked a lot. It has been working substantially less recently. It caused a lot of problems in 2008. And clearly, once you start to understand the system, it's a capital incentivized system that rewards the people with capital. Like, it's not a system that works anymore. You know, in fact, it punishes a lot of people. And the people who are most at risk because of these deficiencies in the financial system are the people who need it the most. The people who are sitting with large retirement funds or own property, or, you know, the kind of accredited investors, let's say, above a certain, you know, high net worth individuals. If something goes wrong, they're still okay. But the people who makes a difference to a couple dollars a month bank charges or, you know, errors on their account, these are the people that can't afford the crisis. So somewhere along the line, banks went from being that which are now allowed everyday people to access goods and services and secure their money safely. Like you look back in the West and all of this, like in the Wild West, somehow became one of the instruments that are used by an elitist class to help keep themselves elite. And they profit by using our money. Like, I'm not against anyone making money or running a business, but the idea that I have to ask permission to use my own money and I pay for the privilege of allowing someone else to use my money, like, something went wrong here. Like, it just went too far, you know?
Yeah, I think one point that you also didn't touch on in why there's so many unbanked people, which is another very important issue, is the issue of identity, right? There's a lot of people that just don't have one, right? So there is still a significant contingent of people that were not born in a state hospital, that do not have a birth certificate, that do not have a government issued ID, right? They don't have an identity, essentially. And so these people cannot, even if somehow, for some odd reason, they had a suitcase full of cash, they would still not actually be able to open a bank account and do online banking and have credit and have, you know, the ability to post pay for various essential services, like you said. So that's another major issue. You know, there's a lot of, like, it does seem like a very foreign concept to a lot of people, like you said, in the first world, or in, you know, in South Africa, it's kind of a combination of first and third world, where you have cities that are very developed, and then you have these rural areas that are just a completely different environment. But for most people that are born in advanced environments, I would say, they were born in a hospital, and they had a birth certificate immediately after their birth, and everything was registered in a government database, and it's completely alien to them that there are human beings that do not have an identity. Yeah, and that's a major issue.
Great point. 100%. And this is a good example of a problem that most of us don't realize or think about. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the numbers, it's totally solvable. Mm-hmm. Like from a financial perspective, I was speaking to someone recently, and I think they said it was like $1.5 billion right now would buy a birth certificate for every person who doesn't have one. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But you're right. And it's not only financial services, but these people don't get access to a lot because, they basically don't exist on paper. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they don't have, they're unbanked. They can't go to a state-run hospital. They can't get schooling. There's no social services or social security of any kind for these people. So, that's definitely a major disadvantage. And as you say, we're punishing poor people for being poor, right? Which is extremely counterintuitive.
100%. And I'm not sitting here trying to vilify anyone. Mm-hmm. But not only financially, one of the beautiful things of the age we live in is the access to information. Mm-hmm. And it allows for so many amazing possibilities. Mm-hmm. And the challenge of our time, at least I see for my children, is going to be how to filter information. You know, we grew up with how do we get answers, and I think the challenge for the next generation is going to be how do I choose what to listen to. But the idea is that we're also punishing these people with that gap. The disparity between access is going to lead to a generation that is substantially further behind this generation. Mm-hmm. So the more that people have access to information on one side and other people don't have on the other side, the further the divide between them gets, the harder it becomes to bridge that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of blockchain applications, a lot of Bitcoin's like power is not only around payments, but it's the ability to bring information to people as well. Mm-hmm. You know, we're at the stage where the power and device. I mean, I have a phone here. It's not a new phone, and it makes my computer from a few years ago look like a joke. Right. You know, which a few years before that, we have basically the entire of human knowledge and history in the palm of our hand. Mm-hmm. And as the price point becomes lower and lower on these things, that starts to become accessible to people who, maybe don't have first world access. So I think we kind of have a responsibility, and it's a tough balance, but we have a responsibility to use the advantages we have in technology that these people don't even realize exist, to bring them the basic technology and services, Yeah. It's a really interesting kind of moral imperative. And I think a lot of people on the anti-Bitcoin camp and a lot of people in the kind of Bitcoin or crypto camp view things very black and white. And I think in reality, we live in a world very much of gray. And I think that we have to work together. Like, it's not our responsibility to solve the world problems. It's also not government's responsibility to make sure you have food when you're old, you know? But it should be some sort of collaborative effort. And one of the things I love most about Bitcoin is, in a world of increasing like social distance and fake Facebook stuff and, you know, these personas online of people not interacting actually as human beings anymore, like, it found a way to kind of cut through the noise and force people to actually talk again, you know, using new tools. But consensus and the establishment of consensus mechanisms in cryptocurrency is one of the most elegant ways of arriving at social consensus that I've ever seen.
Right.
You know, you look at Facebook, someone posts, oh, I did this. Someone's like, well, who cares? Or you're an idiot. Or Twitter, I'm in the toilet. Or Instagram, look at my, like, whatever. Like, who cares? Like, social media is amazing, but I personally am not a big proponent of it. I think it's become a sickness. I think we measure ourselves by what we see other people posting on social, and it's completely eroded any sort of substantive nature in communication. It's become about looking at something rather than speaking to a person, you know?
Right. One thing that you mentioned is that it's not necessarily the government's responsibility to make sure that old people have food. I feel like one thing that we want to understand from an economic perspective, one thing that maybe I believe, maybe this is, you know, we can debate this or not, but I mean, I feel like there's a massive value add for anyone to understand that the more people who have money, the more people are in a position to spend money, right? So making sure that everyone has money means that we grow the class of consumers, right? And the effect of that is that the more consumers we have, the more we can have those consumers transferring their money to companies that add value to the economy, right? So food companies, for example, right? The more people we have with money, the more people, the more those people are going to be making decisions about what food producers they want to support, essentially, with their money. So, you know, a trickle-up economics actually benefits everyone. It benefits companies and it benefits society as a whole, I think. Yeah.
I agree. And I think one of the key mechanisms there is the distribution of wealth. I'm not a socialist. I totally support capitalism. I think if people, you know, do different things, they should be rewarded in different ways, not only financially, but the more people that have access to the money, not just the total amount of money supply, is the key here. And that's what makes the example work. And I agree with you totally.
Yeah.
You know, I think that somewhere along the line, it became the opposite of a win-win. Like, the way we exist as a species, you can still aspire for what you want and do what you want and, you know, live your life however you want. But the more your neighbors win, the more your community wins. This whole charity begins at home thing. You know, I think both sides are dangerous. If you devote your entire life to helping, you know, starving this or blah, 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 whatever, building in the rainforest, and you neglect your own family and your own well-being as a result, you've gone too far. By the same token, if you ignore the fact that you're part of a larger ecosystem, then you're hurting yourself. At the end of the day, you start with yourself, you start with your family, your extended family, your community, your country, or whatever it is. If everyone is working in these extending concentric circles of benefit, you start having these overlapping Venn diagrams of like compounded benefits. The better you do, the better I do. One of the key examples is property values on a street. The more the neighbors take care of their houses, the more your house is worth. It's the same is true. And 100%. The consumerism, job creation, it's. I'm not an economist, but I mean, this stuff is commonsensical, I think, you know?
One of the points that I kind of want to pick your brain on, and you know, I don't know how relevant this is to you, but since you kind of have an understanding of developing countries and developing economics, you know, one of the things that is fairly obvious is that a lot of people are getting their first computer today, And unlike you or I, you know, their first computer is not necessarily going to be a tower, you know, 486, big, you know, 30-pound machine. It's going to be a mobile computer that fits in their pocket, that has to run off a battery all day, and that has to have very low power consumption. So the irony is that the people who benefit most from the potential of being able to open essentially a Bitcoin wallet are going to be people who might be more incentivized to use something like a thin client, for example, blockchain.info, right? So if you're using blockchain.info, which you can set up very, very easily, you're completely sidestepping the censorship resistant capabilities of these technologies. So what do you think about, do you think that there's a potential for running a full node on a mobile device, and how, you know, how do you think that would work, and is there a value add there for you?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's kind of, it speaks to a lot of like different philosophical positions in terms of Bitcoin. The whole idea of, you know, is a Raspberry Pi an acceptable way to run a node or not? You know, it's kind of this ongoing argument, right? So I think the one thing I just want to address from a semantic perspective, and then I'll give my opinion, which is just, you know, my opinion, but you said that people using, you know, thin clients, whatever, are sidestepping like the censorship resistance abilities of the technology. So partly, they may be, as an individual user, sacrificing their ability to take advantage of them personally or customize any of those, but they can still take advantage of critical mass applications that use a censorship resistant to deliver a service. Right. So they're putting themselves completely the subject of a central authority. But the theory is the more than they do that, and, you know, mass adoption results in larger technology drive, then more applications become available. So it's kind of, you know, convenience for privacy thing, right?
Right.
But yeah, there's. I mean, I agree with you, but just semantically, in terms of a node. So, and anything I'm saying up until this point, or I'll say from this point on, like, to be clear, is only my opinion, and I'm just some random dude sitting in a study somewhere, you know, with an opinion. Right. You know, I'm not well educated. I don't know that much about Bitcoin. You know, I'm just learning as I go. Right. So, I think the node discussion is very interesting. I think people fundamentally misunderstand what the purpose of a node or a full node is in Bitcoin at all. And this speaks to the different actors, because you have a lot of different actors. This idea of users, miners, nodes, or merchants. You know, who's important in the ecosystem, who makes the rules. And I think what people fail to understand is that none of the actors make the rules or are more important than any of the other actors. The elegance of Bitcoin and what it actually did, or what Satoshi did by creating Bitcoin, wasn't develop new technology. It was find a way to put existing technology together with economic incentives where opposing actors could act in what was their best interest without worrying about someone else's, and economically it would balance. So to say it in a different way, everyone is equally important. The key is that there's a critical amount of each of the actors. So that's my kind of introduction to the full node thing. So a full node doesn't really verify transactions in the way that a miner does. It doesn't really take advantage of the network in any way that a user does, and it doesn't facilitate growth in any way like a merchant does. But it is an important broadcasting mechanism, for lack of a better word. You know, it's kind of a stop point along the network's history and ledger. So I think I'd love to give you a simple answer, but I'm a kind of complicated person. So I'm going to give you two different answers. I'm going to say that, for the most part, I don't think those users should care about running a full node. I think that they should aim to be as greedy as possible with the technology and use it in the ways that best improve their lives. They have such limited access to stuff anyway. Don't overcomplicate something. Don't make a larger barrier to entry. Just enjoy and grow, you know? the second answer is, I think that for the most part, right, unless you're really a power user, like you have, you know, Cass's HODL now, or you have the NODL node, which is kind of cool now. You know, there are a lot of people who in the community for a long time, and specifically they have an incentive to run a full node. You know, it's kind of the ultimate manifestation of don't trust, verify, right? But these are people who generally, firstly, are holding their own private keys, have hardware security, you know? Like, this is such a step away from everyone else. So my basic answer is, even people like us who, I mean, I don't know what you are. So even people like me who aren't incredibly deep technical users should basically ignore nodes. The only time we should worry about nodes is if we see as a network there aren't enough nodes for the network to have a decent level of redundancy. If that happens, then it's our responsibility as early users or primary users to say, okay, if I want the network to be healthy, I'm going to have to pay the cost of learning how to run a node. But for the most part, we should each focus on what we're best at in the puzzle. And if the network's large enough, there'll be enough people who care about nodes that run them. This argument of how much there should be of everything, I think just let everyone do the part they do the most and encourage organic growth rather than focusing on who should be doing what. And then we should have some sort of, you know, community kind of flag to say, well, guys, we've got a problem. We don't have enough of something, like we had with the scaling debate, or, you know, okay, there is an imminent threat to our growth. Now we need to mobilize and do something about it. But until then, basically ignore anything that doesn't give you benefit. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin is the greedier you are in the system, the healthier the system is and the more equilibrium balances.
Well, you know, I have to just bring up one important point. When I talk about the censorship resistant capabilities of running a full node, what I mean is, so for example, in China, where I lived for 12 years, you can block a domain name on the DNS system, on the domain name system, right? You can block, say, facebook.com from resolving to a real IP address. And so blockchain.info, which is very user-friendly and easy, and it's, you know, and I don't think that these are bad actors who would cheat anyone. They might, but I don't think they would. I don't think that they have, I have no reason to believe that about them. But the point that I'm making is that if you're a Chinese person or an Iranian person or a Saudi Arabian person, right? If you have all your money on blockchain.info, and you don't know anything about VPNs or Tor or whatever, right? At some point, the government could decide to block blockchain.info, and then you would no longer have access to your Bitcoins or your Ether or whatever, right? So that's what I mean when I say censorship-resistant capabilities. And I feel like running a full node for a significant contingent of the world's population is a considerable advantage from the perspective of access, right? Because a full node running at home, right? If I have a full node running on my MacBook Pro, it's running over a dynamic IP address that's constantly in flux, right? So over the Bitcoin network, I understand that they, like, all nodes use the same port number or something like that. So if you block that port, you could disable the entire Bitcoin network in your country. But essentially, in theory, right, there are perhaps some things that you could do if you're running a firewall. But in theory, right, running a full node over dynamic IP addresses and being connected to other full nodes that are constantly rebroadcasting their dynamic IP addresses that are constantly changed is you
don't have to use the DNS gateway. Country can't block you.
Yeah.
Fair. I was thinking much more in terms of use case and application. You're right. In places where governments can shut off access to a web address, essentially, which these thin clients are, you're right. So it's interesting because how does the average person learn about that benefit and be convinced to use it, and then with a technical barrier to entry? So I guess stuff like the Casa HODL and these kind of home mining things that are now coming out that look like Apple TV boxes, I mean, that would kind of solve that. Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it's something that you probably have like a small local group at a cafe or something,
Mm-hmm.
where, John knows how to run a node, he convinces other people and allows them to access his node,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of spreads like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's technically a massive barrier to entry for people. I know, like, when I started using Bitcoin, like, just the basic core client was confusing. Something goes wrong, you start going command line, and even today, like, a whole bunch of the stuff that's been developed, like, it's just beyond what I understand.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I'm not running any lightning channels myself or anything like that, and that's simple, really. Now,
Right.
with everything else that's coming out, it's starting to get really, really complicated, and I'm kind of appealing to authority again. But I guess the need for a simple, easy to use node
Mm-hmm.
that would preserve the censorship resistance capabilities of running a full command line node that is accessible by the average person in regimes that are not tolerable to freedom,
Mm-hmm.
is a great need. Yeah, I take that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the one issue that I have is just currently that problem has not been addressed for the vast majority of new internet users that are first-time computer users that are running, a $150 mobile phone that is used, like they bought a used iPhone 5S or a used Android device, and it's their first computer. How do we get them to run a censorship resistant client to the Bitcoin network or to a cryptocurrency network, right? That's, for me, that's a significant challenge, and also a significant opportunity for this technology, right? If you can solve that problem, which I think can be solved with technologies like IPFS, you don't necessarily have to have access to the data. You don't necessarily have to have the data on your computer. You just have to be able to route access to the database, to some instance of the database somewhere, right? So yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm saying you could also have almost like a system of layer of nodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have like a thinner client version of the node, which connects to a few nodes in the country or whatever that are really deep, heavy, full nodes,
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of like node hopping almost, I think, to answer your question, so we're kind of going with a premise here, right? And the premise is that the more that people have the power to run a full node that's not censorable,
Mm-hmm.
the more they can take their own, money or freedom in their hands, regardless of what the government feels. That's our kind of premise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're saying right now there's a gap that there aren't enough people doing it, right? So the question is, what needs to change for that to happen, right? Now, technically, I agree with you. I think there are a million technical ways, a lot of technical ways that this could be solved. But I think that this is a demand question.
Mm-hmm.
I think, which comes down to education. I think people don't know they should want this.
Right.
So I think perhaps as the average person, rather than whatever it is, my thing should be trying to get people to understand they could take some of this control back.
Mm-hmm.
And then more that there's a ground or grassroots demand for these type of technologies, then it just becomes about technical implementation. Mm-hmm. Like some sort of like light node version that can run on an Android device, we know it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
It just needs a like UX. The problem right now is that for the average user, they want something where they can go, give me node, blah, 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 I want green, right?
Right.
That's the barrier here. And I think no one's building it because there's no economic incentive or no, community level demand for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't really thought about it that way before. Like, nice. I don't know what the answer is, but it's a nice thought experiment,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, that's the primary value add. I mean, this technology, when I was in China, I was working on doing kind of censorship resistant communication platforms, content distribution platforms, and Bitcoin kind of crept up on me. I was working with, email protocols, because sure, you can block email, but what effect is that going to have on your network, right? I was working also with the BitTorrent protocol and distributed hash tables, and I was very interested in these types of technologies. And now I'm really excited about IPFS, which is short for the Interplanetary File System, because it's basically just an extension of the BitTorrent protocol over distributed hash tables. I mean, it's very interesting tech. So so from my perspective, yeah, the fact that you can have an international non-censorable money store and money transfer system is obviously a major value add to the censorship resistant style of technologies, right? Like now you can actually monetize these technologies and in a completely decentralized censorship resistant manner, which is super duper interesting. And that's what I think is a major value add. So, a lot of people in the crypto space right now, they're just focusing kind of on the fintech side, right? Like, what can we do with financial technology, using distributed ledgers? But it goes way deeper than that. Like, what can we do to just completely rebuild the internet from the ground up to be fully decentralized, right? Like, very few people today understand that the internet is essentially controlled by the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, which is a private company in California, right? Owns the entire DNS hierarchy, right? And that in its current implementation, the internet is fully centralized and fully censorable and fully observable by any man in the middle, including your internet service provider, the internet backbone between internet service providers, the backbones between countries. Like, there are points of observation everywhere and points of filtering everywhere, right? And the whole thing, technically, in theory, could be shut off by someone at ICANN at any time, right? So that's an important observation. So for me, this technology goes way deeper than just currencies and financial technologies, right? It's because we also have to recognize that China is 1.4 billion people. There's 1.4 billion people whose information is completely filtered and controlled, right? So that's a huge contingent of the human populace. Yeah. And it's a massive problem, and it's a massive opportunity at the same time. Yeah.
True. So I think there's a few very interesting talking points in what you said. Mm-hmm. So the one obvious thing, decentralization in and of itself is not the end here. Mm-hmm. And I hear that's what you're saying. I'm just kind of stating for anyone watching, because a lot of people talk about the need to be decentralized. Mm-hmm. Being decentralized is not inherently better than being centralized. Mm-hmm. In your example, it's for the sake of protection of rights and lack of observation and privacy and that, which I agree. Decentralization is a route to deal with that. But it's not that we're these crazy people who just want everything to be decentralized. Most decentralized applications are worse than centralized applications.
Of course, yes.
But in this case, it's liberty and freedom. So it's very interesting, because we spoke a little bit about Bitcoin from a financial perspective. I agree with you. Too many people focus on fintech applications, and you're speaking from kind of like an access to information, a human rights and kind of privacy and liberty perspective, and I think there's even more from a social perspective, like social justice and change and things like this that also add on to there as well. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's taken me a while to really understand. But when I got the most excited about Bitcoin was when I understood that it was more than a payment method, that it is literally going to change everything. Whether it's in its current form or it's some piece of technology or it's a use case or whatever, it doesn't matter. The kind of cat's out the bag. What's seen can't be unseen.
Right.
Once people understand that this can be done, they're going to do it in every area of their life. Now, the route to get there and what the end are very different discussions. And a lot of people are just anti-state or anti-establishment. You know, I'm not. I think it's a great mechanism for enabling better acting by those people we trust, you know, and a way to, you know, not maybe make everything trustless, but trust minimize, if you will, you know. And in my experience, we get a lot. I've never lived in China. I mean, I lived in South Africa, but we get a lot of luxury to ignore problems because we live in countries that aren't vehemently bad actors. I've never lived in North Korea or Iran or Syria or Venezuela, so I never had to deal with, you know, blatant trampling of human rights, like not in that way. I lived in South Africa where there's incompetency and inefficiency and bureaucracy, you know, but that's a very different type of, you know, breach of rights. So in most places, the two actors that are primarily responsible for change, I think, for humanity, are nation states or capitalist enterprise. You know, like almost no large-scale change can be affected unless it's economically viable and drives profit, or it's by a federal infrastructure. So if we assume, for the purpose of this, that the nation state isn't going to be the one to enact the change, then kind of what we're missing, the link here in, you know, enabling any of what we spoke about, is finding some way of adding enterprise level economic incentives to freedoms, right? I mean, that's kind of the interesting challenge here. So, and I think Bitcoin did some of that. I think we saw some really crappy market stuff with people jumping on the bandwagon and people being missold what this was. But yeah, I think, how do we get the average person in a censored country to understand that they deserve a higher level of personal freedoms, that it's achievable in a way that's legal, and then deliver on that technology? You know, you're kind of very different actors, you know. Again, I'm kind of zooming out and just talking more hypothetically, you know, about what I'm understanding you saying. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess that's the kind of challenge, you know. But I believe Bitcoin is going to go down in history as the thing that did it in our time, you know. There's no question. How it's going to happen, I'm not exactly sure, but if you look at the greatest inventions ever by humanity, you know, and I mean, order, I guess, is subject to debate, but got to have wheel, got to have fire, got to have printing press, right? Bitcoin's there. There is no doubt in my mind, looking back decades from now, of the 10 most influential inventions of all time, Bitcoin will be there. Like the internet's there, so will Bitcoin, no question.
Yeah, well, Bitcoin is fundamentally just a very successful implementation of a CRDT, right? It's a conflict-free replicated data type. And having the ability to replicate databases across millions of nodes seamlessly, even if it has a lower speed performance over centralized applications, that right there, I agree with you. That's a very, very important keystone of, you know, the 21st and potentially the 22nd century. I mean, this is going to go down as a very, very important technology. Absolutely.
Whether it's the, you know, I think when we look back in 10 or 20 years time, we'll have a clearer understanding of what it is that Bitcoin was or define, you know. And I agree with you that a lot of it is just about an implementation of what's essentially, you know, an upgrade on Napster, right? Because Bitcoin in its simplest form is arguably Napster, right? Just cooler. But for me, that isn't what the beauty is here. I mean, Merkle trees are from the 70s. You know, cryptographic hash functions are not new. There's nothing really new in the early implementations of Bitcoin. We've added some stuff since then. What it was in its simplest form, it was how to solve the double spend problem with proof of work.
Yes.
And balance the economic incentives to maintain that. Like it's the mixing and matching of the pieces that already existed. That for me is as of yet the unrecognized beauty and elegance of Bitcoin. You know, it's not the lines of code, it's not that. Like some of the code's been pretty crappy, and we have today some of the best developers in the world. But it's the vision of a system in which those pieces could fit together, you know, and deliver on a promise larger than any of them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the other things that I want to bring up, you know, since you're in the altcoin space, is I have this idea of, you know, a very interesting application of an altcoin, which is not just another Bitcoin with some slightly different encryption scheme or, you know, different memory hard algorithm for proof of work or whatever. But I really feel like if there was an altcoin that incentivized people for sharing valuable files that became highly popular over a decentralized network such as IPFS, which is essentially BitTorrent, right? If people got paid for sharing files rather than for hosting files, right? So right now what IPFS is working on with Filecoin is a cryptocurrency that could enable people to get paid essentially for running a home data center, right? But I really feel like
the SETI project was like 10 years ago.
Essentially, yeah, exactly. So you want to pay people for the available storage on their device. And I feel like we should flip that, right? We should pay people for filling up that storage, right? So if, for example, let's say this video goes viral and, you know, it gets replicated across 80% of the nodes on this decentralized content distribution network, that content distribution network should be able to have visibility on those replications and the popularity of a given file. And then they could issue a blockchain reward for the original contributor of that file, right? And
Sure.
And rewarding people for contributing videos or music or code updates, software updates, right? Anybody who contributes any piece of information that becomes popular on this network could be incentivized in this way. And that's the value add that I see, where why would someone in a developing country really want to use this client, right? Why would anyone want to use this software? Well, because they get paid to use it, right? I think that's kind of a value add, and that's a network effect kind of incentivizer right there, a forcing function for growth.
So this is a really cool discussion, and so I have three kind of initial thoughts on what you said.
Mm-hmm.
The first is that in its simplest form, it's commoditizing information.
Yes,
and information is we're not, dude. Yeah, like Coke all the way, man. That's We're not differentiating by platform or consumption method. We're just saying, information in whatever form is, the base kind of currency of the future world. Let's commoditize that and incentivize it. So that part, I think, makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of what you're putting forward was, at least from a vision perspective, what Steemit tried to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's obviously a couple differences, but I think essentially that is what Steemit tried to do as a platform.
Mm-hmm.
There are other examples of people that have done aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
But without going too much into what is or what isn't, I'm going to flip on the other side and let's make this an interesting discussion. Let's say you found a good way to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it makes perfect sense. I think it's great. It deals with incentives. It improve distribution, all these wonderful, wonderful things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you end up with a classic problem of monitoring and measurement,
mm-hmm.
right? We're looking at a system that inherently, once you solve delivery or technical problems, the problem becomes qualitatively assessing the value of information.
Okay.
So someone has to decide what is better or worse information. And doesn't this wonderful decentralized system, by its nature, the more successful it is, ultimately encourage a single point of central authority that becomes the ultimate arbiter of determining what is good or not, or digestible information? Mm-hmm. Isn't it pushing us more towards like an absolutely Orwellian society, because it creates the need for a central authority to tell us if information is good or not?
Right.
I'm giving the other side. It's just for the sake of the discussion,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, a lot of people, like, I remember I was watching like a podcast just yesterday where they were having that very discussion, like, do we really want to live in a world where we have completely uncensorable content distribution networks, right? What about things like pedophilia or beheadings or all this, a rape video or something, right? Like, do we really want that coming up in our content stream? And
sorry to cut you for a sec. Let's take this to more like middle of the road. Not what I'm saying, mm-hmm. which is like super, Orwellian. But if you look at social media, right, mm-hmm. and we assume that this sort of system, because any sort of kind of social meritocracy mm-hmm. is a great theory, but I have very, very serious concerns about meritocracy in this world, at least in our ability to implement them. I mean, look at China now in terms of its social scoring system. Like mm-hmm. that is scary mm-hmm. stuff.
Yes.
I don't think the average person understands they're actually being dictated to. But if we look at Facebook and Instagram, let's say, as the kind of base examples of what a user incentivized system would reward, mm-hmm. then what are we to assume? Cat videos, people posting fake pictures of their stuff, and like fashion clothes and like selfies. I mean, this is what our society, like, again, I'm being a little bit like of a dick, but mm-hmm. this is what our society chooses to reward. The mm-hmm. biggest Instagram accounts are food or like people showing their gym workouts, and like, this is what, left alone, we as a society arguably say is the most valuable content.
Sure.
The stuff that does best on social media is, in my humble opinion, the least substance stuff we've ever produced as a society,
Well, I don't disagree with you. Sure. I mean, of course that content would exist, and the network that I'm talking about would not necessarily disincentivize that content, right? So that content exists today, and over this decentralized network, it would continue to exist. That's true. But specifically to the point of what do we do with problematic content, I feel like that problem is very easily solved, right? Like, if I see a video of a beheading coming up in my stream, I could very easily have a button on my software client that I'm running on my computer that would just say obscene, right? Dislike, obscene. And then I could have some software parameters set on my client so that if there's a particular piece of content that, say, 95 or 99% of people have labeled as obscene, I don't want to see it. You don't need to display that to me. I don't need to replicate it on my machine. I don't need to necessarily address it, right? And we can have, I feel like, generally speaking, there would be some pretty good consensus mechanisms that would certainly slow down the propagation of that type of content, right? And also not incentivize it nearly as much, right? Like, the world will not suffer because of videos of gym workouts, right? People are not going to get PTSD because they saw, some hot chick taking a selfie, right? This is not going to cause any kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome, but you could definitely trigger some pretty problematic experiences with some things, some content that could come up that, right? Like someone getting their head cut off, or someone being raped, or
Sure.
Whatever. So obviously the idea that content could, and also on the flip side, here's the flip side of that, right? Here's the flip side of it. There is also problematic content that maybe you do want to see, right? Like, for example, if I was an American, would I want to see the aftermath of civilians in Waziristan or whatever getting blown up by a drone strike? As traumatic as that would be, would society benefit from seeing how that works and how these things are done? That people that were not put on trial, that were just accused of maybe receiving a phone call from someone else that we don't like, and then someone at the CIA decided, yes, this is a target of opportunity, so we're just going to murder them, right? Like Americans typically, like if we take the example of Timothy McVeigh, right, who was a terrorist who blew up a federal building in Oklahoma City in 1995, I believe. Americans understand that typically someone who is accused of a terrorist act would be investigated by the police forces. Then after there's a case built, this person would be there would be an all points bulletin, an APB put out to find this person. Then this person would be arrested and put through a trial. There would be exactly a due process, a trial. There would be a conviction. There would be over a decade of years where this person would have the opportunity to appeal this conviction. And then, years later, I think Timothy McVeigh was executed in the 2000s, maybe as late as 2010, right? Wow. So if someone like Timothy McVeigh deserves that due process, then certainly civilians in third world countries also deserve that, a similar due process, right? So there's horrific shit that we actually do want to see, right? What is a drone strike? What does that look like? Do we want to see a child, a mangled body of a child that got blown up as collateral damage because his father was accused of something, right? Like we don't want to live in a clean, sanitized world where everything's just hunky-dory. We
Clockwork Orange, dude. Clockwork Orange.
Exactly. Like society benefits in some cases from seeing horrific shit, right? So that we can decide, hey, I'm not going to vote for that in the next election, right? I want to stop the drone warfare campaigns. Sure. I mean, so when it comes to problematic content, we don't want to just make it go away. We want to kind of confront it and kind of deal with it as adults, I think. Right? We want to have kid-friendly networks. We want to have abilities to at least know what our kids are watching. But I don't see. It's not immediately obvious to me that the world benefits from being able to filter content.
No, fair point, man. Yeah. I think that we have very quickly gotten some really interesting areas here, mm-hmm. many of which are kind of, large, kind of like, ethical and philosophical and kind of, 50,000 foot questions. So I'm gonna say like this for now. I accept your premise that too effective filtering mm-hmm. Of problematic content leads to society that doesn't know how to defend against it in some way or form. So yeah, I think that's true. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the network, I'm going to say a couple of just random thoughts that don't deal with the kind of deep moral, like decant issues here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If we saw nothing before Facebook, and then Facebook was really kind of, you know, global access to a shared platform of information dissemination in some form.
Mm-hmm.
Now with the Cambridge shitstorm and everything else that happened with them and people starting the Google trial, like, it seems to me logically that the progression would be towards this type of system you're describing anyway. It seems like we kind of headed there anyway, which is good, right? In terms of the earliest question about incentivizing this, I think from an implementation perspective, not from a moral or kind of, you know, like large ethical question perspective, but I think one of the key missing components in any of these systems today is the ability for some sort of incentive to translate into real world spending ability for someone in a rural third world economy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That bridge is for me, that's probably the killer app in the supply chain, you know? Once that becomes easily solvable, then the creation of economic incentives for people further up the value chain, like, becomes larger. And that maybe increases our propensity to do this, whatever. And then last two things is I definitely want to have some of these discussions again with you, even if we aren't filming. Like, this has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
And as kind of just from the side, and, you know, you've made a couple of kind of bold statements, you know, which I look forward to discussing. I made a couple earlier, but you're really putting some stuff out there, which I like.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to kind of counter with one of my own, which is your comment that, you know, selfies and, like, you know, hot chicks doing gym or whatever isn't going to necessarily give PTSD. Totally agree. But I would argue that if the problem is us as people knowing what to filter and how and whatever, it's kind of like my argument is that the ability of this stupidity to erode our moral fabric as a society over time is substantially more dangerous than the short-term threat of PTSD or even a drone strike. Right. I mean, that's kind of a crazy thing, but you can hear my position on this. I have a huge problem with this. I think it's breeding a generation of entitled and substance-lacking people who, I mean, not everyone, but I think that's where it goes towards.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of probably a takeaway for me from all of these which is better kind of questions that we've been talking about is yeah, I don't know what the right answer is. I don't think we've figured it out yet. But given the choice any day to live in a world where information is filtered or it's not, and I have access, I'll choose access every day of the week, twice on Sunday. I would much rather have the problems we're talking about than live in some sort of like dictatorial regime or have people tell me what I'm allowed to do, you know? And I guess it's the kind of every person is an idiot being allowed to choose for everyone else, but a large enough crowd kind of becomes smart enough to single out the idiots. I'm not saying I fully agree with that, but that's kind of the basis of a lot of these systems. It's like we don't have the answer, but enough exposure to enough people, and hopefully we all don't act like morons. You know, that's kind of the premise. Yeah, right. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you, I mean, in your kind of research and kind of endeavors in the altcoin space, have you encountered anybody who's done some interesting work on the core client governance, right? Update governance. So, for example, voting mechanisms, right? So, do we want to, as a cryptocurrency, do we want to run this update or not? And if, let's say, 80% of people are not going to run this update, then do we want to fork the network, right? Do we want to bifurcate things? Have you encountered anyone that's kind of been doing any work on that in that space? Oh, I think I lost you. Okay, so yeah, Mark's internet just cut out, but he's back now. So anyway, yeah, so we were just talking about the you know, your potential experiences with people working on solving the governance through kind of distributed voting over some kind of blockchain mechanism. So have you seen anything, any interesting work in that space?
Yeah, I have. Interesting from the perspective of people trying. Like, I'm not a big believer that any of the mechanisms I've seen are better than just update or don't and fork or don't. But yeah, I've seen two kind of interesting approaches to it. One based more on a voting system, which is kind of like pre-update, we vote and approve the update. So it's kind of like a second level peer review, almost like peer review for quality and community review for acceptance, you know? And then I saw a different one, which I didn't fully understand, but the idea was mostly a rollback. So updates are launched with a built-in rollback, and then a certain acceptance level deletes the rollback. You know, so it's kind of like, if not a threshold passed, then, you know, it's like it will automatically roll back. It is kind of a weird idea, but there's something kind of cool about it. I'm not sure how it would work in the real world, but yeah, those are the two approaches I've seen, you know?
Okay.
But nothing really, like, nothing major. I think most people who are trying to create a coin kind of accepted Bitcoin's governance, you know, especially early on, you know, consensus or fork, like, that's it. You know, you're not happy, fork off, all right?
Right, right. I mean, but this is an interesting problem to solve for obvious reasons. I mean, because it would disrupt incumbent democracies right now. I mean, in Canada, we have this really major. Well, it's, you know, I mean, Canada's actually doing pretty good, I guess, relatively speaking, compared to the rest of the world. But for example, in Ontario, where I live, the Premier of Ontario is Doug Ford. So to give a bit of context, Doug Ford is Rob Ford's brother. And Rob Ford was the mayor of Toronto who was made famous because he admitted to smoking crack. So basically, we live in a province where 60% of the electorate voted against Doug Ford. But because we have a first past the post system in a multi-party democracy, we had the Liberals, which used to be in charge. We had the NDP, the New Democratic Party, which is more to the left of the Liberals, and then we had the Conservatives, which got 40% of support. But because in each riding, 40% of people voted for the Doug Ford, essentially, that was the largest segment of the population in each riding. So we got vote splitting. So now they have a majority of the seats. They won a majority of the ridings in Ontario, and they have a majority control over the Ontario government, right? So this could easily be solved, easily be addressed by just ranking candidates in order of preference, right? So that if, for example, you want to vote NDP, and your second choice is the Liberals, and then your third choice would be the Conservatives, right? And then the candidate with the least number of choices would win, with the least number of points, essentially, in that riding would win that riding and get their MP into the provincial legislature. But nobody has an incentive to implement this system. Like the Conservatives that just won because of the bullshit first past the post system are not going to put in place a system that would make it so that they would never win another election ever again, obviously, right? Right? So this is the problem with electoral reform, is that the people who win in the legacy system are obviously not incentivized to ameliorate it or to make it more fair, right?
Sure.
And so this decentralized voting system, right? Once you have money, voting, right? Media, you've pretty much, I think, completely disintermediated the legacy governments that in the future could be made mostly irrelevant, right? This is what's exciting about this decentralized technology, is that it's about more than just fintech, right? It's really, it goes so much deeper than that, obviously. So that's why I'm talking to you about solving the governance issue, where, you know, there must be use cases where forking is a disincentive, right? It dilutes the value of a network, right? You're taking
Look at Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah,
look at what just happened there.
Yes.
Disaster.
Right. Yeah. It's a complete disaster, and they didn't solve any problems, right? By going from 7 transactions per second to 14, right, with a 2 megabyte block size. That doesn't give them the scalability of Visa, which can do 80,000 transactions per second, for example, right?
No, I'm saying that this the last fork now.
Yeah, now you have Bitcoin Cash ABC. Yeah, you have Bitcoin Cash ABC and Bitcoin SV. So even Bitcoin Cash is forking. So now you have forks of forks of forks, which is just
the beauty is that all the sum of the parts of all the forks is worth less than the original, obviously, which is a sign of the system that's failing.
Yes.
So I hear you. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, if you imagine it like your Ontario example, right? Or the great use case for a better governance system. It's kind of 2 different problems that need to be solved from 2 different directions. And where they intersect in the future will be our ideal solution. The one is the electoral system and the reform required there, with this like ratings idea where the majority of people don't want someone and he wins by majority. So kind of need electoral reform that way, and you've raised the problems there. And then you need kind of fast and open source software methodology to evolve to a point where it isn't just about who wants to contribute. How do you deal with open source projects when everyone wants to contribute, which is the problem Bitcoin's been dealing with that Firefox never had, you know? So when these 2 kind of things intersect, we can have this beautiful governance system from a measurement perspective and the, you know, mechanism to ensure that it's kept true, you know? Yeah, but dude, this is well above my pay grade. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. I think, you know, like democracy is it's a shitty system, but the least shitty one we have, you know? I think that's kind of where we are with everything else.
There was one problem that a friend of mine, Eric, not a problem, but a potential solution, I should say, which was, okay, so one of the major issues with distributed voting is essentially, how do you make it so that one participant in a decentralized network only gets 1 vote, right? Because what would stop someone from just creating 1,000 nodes or 10,000 or 1,000,000 nodes in virtual machines, right? And then just voting as many times essentially as they wanted in a decentralized election. So it goes back to the problem of identity and proving your identity over pseudo-anonymous technologies.
Look at Civic, look at Self-Key, like this stuff, that's exactly what they do. It solves the problem.
How do they solve the problem?
So, well, not the whole problem, the identity aspect of the problem.
Right.
So, you create your identity profile, right? And it is verified in some way on your device, right? So it is unique to device. Like, so I have Civic on my phone. It's fingerprint and device. So it cannot run on 2 devices at the same time. It cannot run 2 instances on the same device, and it cannot run without my password and fingerprint and device. So I can't do things twice. So there's been like votes or whatever it is, or I want to use Civic. Like, I have to verify who I am in order to use it. But what it does then is it stores your profile information. It's cryptographically hashed.
Mm-hmm.
Means that you have much less risk of identity theft. You don't have to give your details to like all these third-party, bullshit stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is Civic verifies whatever aspect of the identity profile the site needs.
Mm-hmm.
If it's uniqueness or if it's age, great use case is age verification. Why do I have to give my credit card number on a site that I don't know if their security is any good just to be able to use a service, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Civic is great because it sends a message to the site saying this user is above the age, or this user is geographically where you want it, or this user hasn't been on the system before. Like there's so much, so much scary about giving your identity online today.
Yeah.
Like, and we all do it. And I wish I knew like years ago, like how bad this would be. It's a price we pay for convenience. But this is it. We all have these digital footprints. And as actors become more sophisticated in their manipulation of individuals and targeting of like people, like we're all going to get screwed some way or another. Identity theft is only the beginning. So the idea that it is a centralized company, but it uses a decentralized database that's hashed.
Yeah.
There has to be a point of failure here. It's great to say there shouldn't be any point of failure, but the reality there's going to be a point of failure. And I would rather have it as a single point of failure that's not only just walled garden, but that's walled garden and hashed. Because people still don't understand the idea of how bad this walled garden scenario is going to play out. One of my theories is we're going to be using blockchains to secure previous firewalls and federal level walled gardens. Because you can't, walls get breached always. The data has to inherently protect itself. And that's the beauty of what you were speaking about earlier, the idea of this transparency and the fact we can put stuff out there. When the energy isn't focused on trying to protect the data inside my little box, and rather it's how can I use that data in the larger world,
right?
Things get very, very, very different. But basically from an identity perspective, cryptographic hash function, like only central point of failure is the link of device and biometrics to individual, which is on their servers. And then every website you go to, every service or application you use gets verified by Civic, not by you giving your information. So it's really cool. It's really cool. I like it a lot.
The other solution that again, my friend Eric brought up, what he proposed, which immediately I kind of had I was opposed to it, but when I thought about it, I realized it's not that terrible of an idea because, again, you still have the forking mechanism. The idea that he mentioned to me was, what if a person, a node's vote was proportionate to the amount of cryptocurrency that they held, right? Now, yes, there's a very obvious problem with that, which is essentially that it's the very definition of an oligarchy, right? But on the flip side, it's also how companies work, right? So corporate governance essentially works in this way. The bigger your position in a company's stock, the more of a vote you have in a company by election, for example. And that is kind of legitimate. Like if you've bought into this ecosystem and you're holding a position in this ecosystem and you're promoting this ecosystem and you're investing in this ecosystem more than other participants, maybe you should, maybe in theory, there are some arguments for why you would have a taller soapbox to stand on in this specific ecosystem. And the other very interesting point is, again, if this does become a corrupt oligarchy with this system in place, again, the majority of the participants in the network could always just fork away and say, fuck you then, right? So they could fork off, obviously. And the advantage of such a system is obvious in that, again, it doesn't require a central authority. It solves the identity problem. right? It allows for completely pseudo-anonymous voting over cryptographic signatures without any central authority verifying that one vote is one person, right? It solves that problem. So I just wanted to bring that up, that there is kind of a solution that sort of comes from the corporate governance model, where larger stakeholders would just have a more significant vote, and that we also have to recognize that that's not totally a morally illegitimate way of doing it, and that it works in a fully decentralized way as well.
Fair enough. I mean, there are a lot of POS coins that use that as a basis for their staking mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And like companies like Secure Vote, for example, which we're working with Janitor, they've kind of built upon it.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear you. I mean, there is, I think we'd have to delineate a couple of things. Like, is it a proof of work coin? Is it something that had a pre-mine? Like a system like that with a large pre-mine would be a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But if it wasn't, then okay, yeah. But there is something to be said about the fact that the people who have the most interest in the system should be allowed to have a say. So yeah, exactly. It becomes just technical mechanism rather than like philosophical, because technically, like you said, corporate governance, democracy in its simplest form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not democracy. I don't know what the word is, but what you said, company voting proportional to shares owned, you know? I don't know, man.
It's corporate democracy, I guess. Yeah, sure. I mean, based on your position in the company.
Sure. I think the issue is, like, if you look at different examples of it, there are hundreds of examples where it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at something like, I don't want to name any coins, but something that had like, 25% pre-mine.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
basically guaranteed, like, you have the answer always. Mm-hmm. And then you look at something that's obvious, totally messes with the mechanism. Mm-hmm. And then you look at something like Bitcoin, where, you could always fork, right? But the problem is, on a large enough network, you have value erosion in the event of a fork.
Yes.
So what you're doing is you're creating a mechanism to, okay, we could do this a bit more elegantly, but every time we don't agree, we're just going to hurt ourselves, which, and I see the argument against that as well. So for anything in the middle, it's kind of a good point. But I think Bitcoin is a kind of standalone example, mm-hmm. because it was the flagship, and because people only started caring once it had reached critical mass in terms of price and network level security and hash power, and acceptance levels amongst merchants. I think it kind of can't work the best system. It mm-hmm. kind of has to keep its legacy system, and the legacy system has to like incrementally and slowly evolve towards a better system, mm-hmm. Because we kind of care more about what we know works most of the time rather than risk what might not, what might fail once.
Right.
Yeah, but I hear you. I mean, in its simplest form, like I think your friend's got a good point in that. What we often do is we're overcomplicating solutions. We have a real world problem and we think about the ideal utopian kind of solution. If X was to change and Y was to change, I moved this domino and 17 other people did this, and all these pieces are radically different to the way they were, we could end up with a solution that was marginally more effective than the one we could implement tomorrow just by doing the obvious thing. Right. So I think there's beauty in the simplicity there from a staking perspective, but I think Bitcoin would be an exclusion. It would be an exception. Bitcoin's too big to get screwed around with, like internally. I think one of our responsibilities as a community, and what I really liked about the user-activated soft fork, the hats and all this crap, was it showed us that if we mobilize as a community against a perceived threat externally, we actually have to stop it. And I think that's the precedent that's going to be key in the next year or two when we get our first real like nation state level attack, because we haven't seen anything really bad externally yet. Mm-hmm. The only example I would give, arguably, I mean, what is there really? Like Silk Road isn't even, because they didn't try to shut down Bitcoin. Like, I mean, there are a few, like there's the China bans and stuff like that, but the one for me that stands out that could have turned into a nation level event and Bitcoin wouldn't have been strong enough was when WikiLeaks added the Bitcoin adoption thing. was like in 2013 or even maybe 12, and Satoshi asked him to remove it because he said they'll just cut the network, like the government will just cut the network. Bitcoin wasn't strong enough to support that kind of attack, and I think that was very smart. But 100% believe we're going to have nation-level attacks, inbound, whether institutional or just massive bad actors, or kind of super cool botnets or actual governments. But I think that we need to learn to mobilize, and we should spend a little bit less time worrying about making things perfect, a lot more time worrying about building and user adoption.
Yeah.
Like I think the imminent threat to Bitcoin over the next 2 years is user adoption. It's not, and a lot of that is based on UX and education. I don't think it's price, it's not scalability, it's not like everyone should keep building. I mean, you look, since the scalability debate kind of ended with a fork, right? And we saw kind of, okay, this is bullshit, both solutions kind of work, right? I'm not going to speak which I like, whatever, for that's a whole different discussion. But I think that we saw a proliferation of technology that we've been waiting for, whether it was stuff like Lightning and its implementations, Mimblewimble now, Schnorr, confidentials, bulletproofs, all this stuff is starting to come out, plus all the full node stuff like Noddle and Hodl. Like, it was all kind of stuck because we were focusing on this big issue. I think we need to put our heads down, build as much as possible that makes sense, that extends adoption, focus on, how does the average person, how do we simplify the message, in terms of value proposition or in terms of use or whatever, like you were saying with censorship resistance. So that when the next attack comes, we have a larger war chest. And not a war chest from a financial perspective. We have vested interests. We have people who care. We have less bullshit about drugs, money, and Ponzi schemes. But here, one more person tell me Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme. Like, but dude, like, I'm gonna say firstly, like, before you say anything, like, this has been really a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'm loving this, and I think we're very far apart. But in the event that we find ourselves in the same place, some of the questions we've raised are definite late night, like at a bar discussions. I think.
Yes.
And I'd love to continue this, or filming or just offline. But yeah, really, I really, really appreciate the time and the great questions, and you made me think as well, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time as well. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm filming these discussions is because I feel like they could be valuable to onboarding people into the community, right? Because really, a lot of the focus in the cryptocurrency space, in the Bitcoin space, is about hodling and to the moon and all of this speculation stuff. Like, and even in the mainstream media, like there was an episode of what's that show? Last Week Tonight with John Oliver on HBO, where he talks about blockchain technology. And he spent most of the time in that segment talking about the fact that what most people are doing in this space is speculating and trying to use it to get rich, right? Whereas really, this is invaluable technology that goes so much deeper than just fintech or just some get-rich-quick scheme. It's not. Is it a Ponzi scheme? Well, it has elements, certainly, right? It has been at times, right? When it was going up to $20,000 in 2017, like it was essentially the promise that if you put money in now, you'll get more money out, and because other people are putting more money in later, right? So that's pretty much, that is actually technically how a Ponzi scheme works. But that doesn't mean that the technology.
For the record, like, don't agree at all with that statement. Like, I see the problems with what happened there, but I view it very, very differently. But different discussion, different time. But I don't think it has those elements, at least not portrayed that way. I think it is portrayed
that way. That's what I mean. And it's viewed that way by others. right? It's viewed that way by others. By others, you know, they're always trying to figure out when the pump's going to happen and when the dump's going to happen, right? That's what most, you know, like in a lot of Bitcoin groups that I'm in on WeChat or on Telegram or whatever, right? A lot of people, a major focus of the discussion involves, is there a rally, right? What's going on with the price, right? And there's a lot less of these types of discussions about the underlying inherent value of these technologies. And that's why I like to record them and put them up on YouTube and also disseminate them over BitTorrent, is because it's very important that people understand why these technologies are valuable, right? And that these discussions, certainly, we as members of this community, we want these discussions to enter the narrative, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you that it is not a Ponzi scheme, but it has at times been viewed and certainly used that way, right? Obviously. So that's why I think recording these discussions is beneficial. So that's why I do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice, I agree. No, well done, man. I think you're right. I think this is a really good way of, getting people to see some of what, you know, they're not seeing in mainstream. Yeah, nice. I think it's a great initiative, man.
Yeah, so that's why I do it. Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, we did talk about Coin Janitor for a while, and I think that's a very valuable mission, you know, to try to recycle some of the technologies that are interesting features, interesting value adds, but maybe not viable enough to become a full-scale, long-lasting competitor to something like Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, I definitely view that as valuable, and thanks for that. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover in this conversation?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm glad we focused mostly on Bitcoin and not Coin Janitor. I'm much more interested in these discussions. I'm more interested in Bitcoin, you know, and I think that exactly as you said, like sitting listening to me plug something I'm doing for an hour, not so interesting. But if we can help people get a better understanding of what the underlying technology is in Bitcoin, I think that is more valuable. I do love Janitor. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think a year or two from now, everyone will look back and it will be so obvious that we should have done it. Right. But right now, we're kind of the ones plodding along, pioneering, saying, no, that's good, it's good. So any support I appreciate, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak about Janitor, Coin Janitor. But yeah, in terms of Bitcoin, I think we did a good basic covering. I think we got an understanding of each other's position, and I think we've laid some good groundwork for either some crazy, like, you know, moral absolutism kind of discussions, or just maybe another time a focus on use cases and applications of technology that aren't 20 years away. Like, what could happen in a few years that could help us move towards that? You know, better distribution of access, you know, that would be kind of cool. But for today, I've had a great time, and I think we covered a lot. Man.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Did you want to plug your social media, like your Twitter or your LinkedIn or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my name, you can find me on my name. It's Marc Kenigsberg. I've also started uploading a few of my talks. I talk quite a lot around the world, and maybe if anyone wants to look, my latest talk from last month in Athens was why the next Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and what will happen to a lot of these altcoins over time. And it was kind of controversial. And also Roger Ver came and listened and argued with me in the end. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, I'm just a crazy person that loves this technology, that I think where this is going in the next years, at least directionally, and can't wait for Bitcoin to do good. And you can find me on Marc Kenigsberg on YouTube, on Twitter, wherever else you want. I don't really use Facebook. And that's it. Anyone wants to talk, just hit me up. I love talking. I think we need to be talking more about the good that can be done. And I think exactly what you try, man, that's the way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, you know, thanks again for your time. And anytime you want to do it again, let me know.
Awesome, George. Appreciate it, man.
Yep.
Have a great rest of your weekend.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man.